Welcome to I'm Your Target Demographic. Today we're continuing our journey into miniatures and wargaming and tabletop role-playing. I love miniatures, and I spent a lot of the pandemic buying and painting these models, so I'm hoping to make a handy video for folks looking to get into this hobby. This is definitely introductory level. Today we're covering the models themselves. Where do you find them and what sort of options might you have? On the screen as we showcase some of these models, I'll include the company or designer or a YouTube channel on the screen so that you can also check them out. In video 1, I talked about the biggest games that include miniatures. This is the place that a lot of folks enter this hobby. They sell starter boxes for some of these games at a lot of comic book and hobby shops and even bookstores like Barnes & Noble. The miniatures created intentionally for these games are likely the most expensive. Starting an army in a game like Warhammer can be incredibly expensive, but you absolutely get what you pay for. Games Workshop models are intricate and detailed. They do require a lot of assembly, so you'll want to invest in a kit with things like a hobby knife, small clippers, and a file. You'll often open the box and get what's called a sprue, and you'll be responsible for cutting out, filing down, and then assembling and gluing your miniatures. The more intricate sets often have options, so you can assemble your troops how you want in various poses and different weapons. In terms of buying models in other lines, I can tell you a few things I've learned. Warhammer Age of Sigmar models might be great, but are definitely larger than typical 25mm models. So if you're buying miniatures for Dungeons & Dragons, things like orcs are going to be too big in the Warhammer scale. However, Games Workshop's Lord of the Rings game is a little truer to 25mm, so a box of orcs from that franchise works perfectly for D&D. Likewise, I've purchased sets of Frostgrave, such as their excellent Gnoll models. That's an easy way to get a lot of models at once for Dungeons & Dragons. They also sell models specifically for D&D, typically through the company WizKids, who has a D&D line with popular creatures and characters. You can usually find both pre-painted and unpainted models, though pre-painted can be fairly horrible, but definitely solid if you're not planning on painting them yourself anyways. If scale itself isn't important and you're just trying to use things like Warhammer models for your D&D games, you only need to worry about the base size. A monster might come with a rectangular base, or on an oval base, but for D&D, it should be on a 3-inch or 75mm circular base. You'd want to keep that in mind. I tend to buy bases separately, so that I can use the circular bases instead of the ones that might come with the Warhammer models or Frostgrave or whatever board game you get them from. A good idea for D&D is to look for old Dungeons & Dragons pre-packaged games, because they'll come with a boatload of monsters, typically in the right scale that you need. It's not impossible to find them used or cheap. Now, there are folks out there that create miniatures for games like D&D and other role-playing games, but don't have a game system of their own. One of the largest is a company called Reaper Miniatures that has a long line of miniatures that often align with the scale you'd need for role-playing games. Reaper is incredibly affordable and often high quality. Reaper Miniatures is known for large Kickstarter projects where you can prepay for hundreds of models for just dollars each. Now, a recent addition to the market is the rise and accessibility of 3D printing. This means that if there's a monster you'd like a model for, there are creators out there creating these models. If you have a 3D printer, you can purchase these files so that you can print them yourself when the need arises. You'll see the option to purchase what are called STL files, which is short for stereolithography. You purchase the file, print on your own. Now, if you're like me, you don't have a printer. So you can also find what are called merchants, which are people who are running a business, printing and selling these files for you. I use Etsy primarily, and there are a lot of excellent shops you can find. So if you head to Etsy, you can search for things like dragon miniature and see a whole lot of results. These shops also should give you scale options. So you can say if you need one scale to 25mm for D&D, or an oversized model to 32mm for Warhammer. Now, when the vendor sells you the print, you'll likely still have to assemble the pieces yourself so that they don't break during shipment. You can find people creating models for all sorts of games here. So those are your best options for finding and purchasing miniatures, either by the game designer themselves or from third parties. Next week, we're going to cover the basics to start painting them, including the necessities you'll need to buy and terms you'll need to know on your painting journey. See you next week.